collaborative work that it's inspiring. But what I like about the process is this interesting way that the grant competition emerged as a competition, and it's a really cool collaboration. Just the grant program itself is a really cool collaboration between the Rockefeller Foundation and HUD. And Louise will tell us a little bit about that, the iteration of it. So I think it's really interesting to see the way different leadership segments have come together on this. And then just as interestingly is the way that the process came together in our region. And CMAP really took the lead on bringing forth those who could apply for this grant. So CMAP has taken some leadership in organizing individual entities which are eligible as applicants. And again, Louise will cover that, and if there's too much, we'll come back and kind of go over some of the details with the different applicants. But it is a collaborative effort that is being responded to by these individual entities. And the entities that are eligible for applying for this are DuPage County, Cook County, the City of Chicago, and the State of Illinois. So they're all working individually together. The grant application is due today, which is why we pushed the panel discussion to this morning, hoping that everybody had a chance to hit the send button. And in Cook County,
we hit it and it didn't take.
oh,
We've been hitting it now for several months. And I'm checking it every moment to find out that it ran. But so far I haven't gotten that email.
we were sensitive to the stressful deadline, so I guess we're still enjoying the excitement of that stressful deadline.
Right.
I appreciate some of the.
This is not small.
So yes, you.
I think I can actually take it if you unplug it from the charger.
Oh.
It's kind of easier.
So Louise Young is from CMAP, and she's going to lead with a little bit of a presentation, and then she'll give us an overview on the process and how they've been working together. And then we'll be joined by Jane Hornstein, Jennifer Hintz, and then Aaron Joseph from the City of Chicago. So just brief introductions. Louise is urban environmental planner with CMAP. She has a master's in city planning, city and environmental planning from MIT. She has a Bachelor of Arts in International Affairs from George Washington University. Jane is the Deputy Director of the Cook County Bureau of Economic Development, Department of Planning and Development. She's got a very strong housing background, worked with the CHA and the Metropolitan Planning Council as a housing consultant doing some work with HUD before this, and then has a BS in Urban Studies from Macalester College and an MBA from DePaul. Aaron is Deputy Sustainability Officer at the City of Chicago and has a really interesting background in investment in real estate. And working with the Urban Partnership Bank and Woodlawn Ventures, and a bachelor's degree in art history from UW-Madison and an MBA from University of Chicago. And Jennifer Hintz is joining us from the DuPage County, where she's the stormwater, she's a civil engineer in the DuPage County Stormwater Management Department. She's filling in for Mary Litros, who's been the lead on this application process, and then is working with FEMA and HUD specifically, getting county assistance for flooding issues. So she has a certificate in engineering for energy sustainability from the University of Wisconsin, and he did some work with Engineers Without Borders as well. Anyway, really interesting panel, and then if we can turn it over to Louise to
Thanks for having us here. I'm just going to give a brief overview of the competition and how we all came to work together, and then I'll let each of the applicants tell a little bit more detail about their specific pilot projects and what they're thinking about in their own jurisdictions. So Edith gave a really good summary of it. So there's $1 billion through the HUD CDBG, the Community Development Block Grant Program, that they want to allocate through this competition for disaster resilience. The eligible or the qualifying criteria is that you had to have had a natural disaster from 2011 to 13, and the competition is structured into 2 phases. So we're in phase 1 right now, and as Edith mentioned, we are literally on our last day of this part of our lives. And the winners will be announced in June of this year, And then phase 2 will be happening basically from now until October of this year. And then the final funds will be announced in December. So it's a pretty short time frame for what is really a lot of very comprehensive resiliency planning. And one of the explicit goals of HUD was to build a lasting legacy of resilience across the country. And so, as Edith mentioned, they have a partnership with the Rockefeller Foundation in which they were able to hold a series of workshops in different regions. And so for us, it's been a very different kind of grant application process in that it's not just a bunch of people kind of individually writing the application in their own offices, but it's entailed a lot of public engagement before the proposals even due. I can talk a little bit more about that, but it also has required us to talk a lot together about how we might approach this as a region. So just to be very clear about how we're defining resilience, this is partially from the Rockefeller Foundation as well as HUD and a number of other sources. It's the ability of our region to withstand and recover from hazards, stressors, or shocks of any type by reducing vulnerabilities across built, natural, and social systems. And then another aspect of resilience that I think is very interesting to us is the ability to increase capacity at the individual, community, and regional level over time. And this is just a quick graphic of how, it's from the Rockefeller, I think it's the Urban or Cities Resilience Report with ERA, about how they are thinking about where each type of activity fits into this resiliency framework. So as Edith mentioned, the City of Chicago, Cook County, DuPage County, and the state of Illinois are all qualified for this competition. And we thought this was a really unique opportunity to collaborate because this is the highest concentration and cluster of eligible applicants anywhere in the country. I think New Orleans also has 3 eligible jurisdictions, and there's a couple of other places as well. But we are unique in that we share the exact same disaster that we qualified for, which is the storms in the spring of 2013. And we share a lot of regional problems and opportunities as well. And so the element that kind of ties us all together is severe and chronic flooding. Although the 2013 storm was the disaster that qualified us for this competition, we're also looking much broader beyond just recovering from that specific instance. So there's been, I mean, even with tiny storms in the region, we get severe basement backups, there's a lot of utility transportation outages, electricity outages, severe erosion and environmental damage, sewer overflows, and even deaths. And so these next couple of graphs maps show just how regional this problem is. If you look at the way that we're urbanizing, you know, the urbanization in Lake County, McHenry County upstream have really drastic effects on everything below that, and especially with the expectation that the frequency and intensity of storms will increase due to climate change. You know, this needs to be a problem that we're addressing together. In addition to the precipitation elements of this and the physical infrastructure elements of this, there's also a really strong social component. So, you know, flooding and other types of disasters, hazards, stressors, whatever it might be, affect vulnerable populations very differently, very disproportionately. And so we were also able, through this competition, to take a look at how flooding and other stressors play out in terms of different factors of vulnerability. And you know, even though this shows a lot of hotspots in the city of Chicago, in southern Cook, and in some northern areas as well, we also wanted to recognize that vulnerability looks really different in different places. So DuPage, for example, isn't a place that you might expect there to be a lot of vulnerability, but you actually have a lot of elderly people on fixed incomes with a limited ability to move. And so just to understand how our social structures are set up across this region to look at a lot of different factors of this was a really interesting aspect of this process. And when I talk about vulnerability, a lot of times we think about that on the individual level, but as I think Jane will talk more about in her presentation, we're also looking at just other kinds of vulnerabilities to our systems, so governance capacity, infrastructure deterioration, you know, housing stock, mobility and transportation access, these kind of things that are not just things that limit a person's ability to withstand or transform from any kind of disaster, but also community-wide and neighborhood-wide. So because of all these shared elements, we were able to form a Northeastern Illinois Resiliency Partnership, and the state also has formed something similar for those of you who are from the 7-county region, So the Illinois Department of Natural Resources has been taking the lead on this, and they formed a parallel state resilience team. Through this partnership, we were able to involve a lot of people in this. I gave some of the statistics of how many meetings we were able to have and the people that we talked to about stormwater or innovative financing for resilience, climate scientists to understand downscale projections of climate change, nonprofits and advocacy groups, community institutions, and then the individual applicants themselves did a lot of community outreach to talk to the residents and the organizations in the specific pilot areas that they've chosen. So our approach to building regional resilience has really two tracks. The first is capital investments in local planning activities, and that's where the applicants will provide more detail about how they're approaching this in their own jurisdictions. But then we also wanted to make sure that regardless of whether we get this HUD funding, we want to commit to doing resilience planning through institutional and policy changes. And so a lot of our working groups and a lot of our consultation with these nonprofits and government and private sector organizations have also focused on what do we need to do at a higher level in order to make sure this is a long-lasting effort and it's not just contingent on whether we get some money from HUD. I'm also sick.
But I didn't get it work.
We established that.
We're working the same office.
So we're still exploring what this means right now, and this will be a long-term effort that is really just beginning, looking at financing, policy changes, updates to Bulletin 70, which provides a lot of, baseline standards for how you build infrastructure, as well as environmental and other social programs that might need to be enhanced or improved in order to better support all of this in a cohesive and coordinated manner. And I'll let the applicants take it from here, but I wanted to just provide a high-level summary of how their work relates to each other. So when we were first thinking about this, everyone needed to focus on a specific pilot area, and then the way we were able to piece it all together, I guess, into a cohesive regional approach was the understanding that this region sits at the divide of the Mississippi River Basin and the Great Lakes Basin. And so we really are the steward of this really important two important watersheds. And if you take any kind of transect that goes from one of those bodies of water to the other, you get this cross-section of a region that's really representative of the three pilot areas, I guess more than three, including the state, but are a little bit different from ours, that resemble the characteristics that you might find anywhere in the 7 counties. So you go from very highly urbanized to more suburban, and as we go down the spectrum. And we were able to do a lot of analysis across, as I was mentioning, the built and natural and social systems, and that transect spectrum idea really held through across all of those systems. And so we're really excited to use these pilot areas as a way to test our approach and refine how we might be able to deploy this in other communities in this region and also across the state. So I'll stop here, and I'm not sure who will go first, but I'll let the applicants talk a little bit more about what they're doing in their specific areas and more about those details. And then at the end, I'll talk a little bit more about how you might be able to get involved and how you might be able to think about this in your own communities.
You know who wants to go first? Jane, you'll start with.
Okay, so with Cook County, so we looked at, so this is just some high-level stuff about how we got into the competition. And this is the actual definition that the partnership put together for what is resilience. And it's the ability of a region to maintain and improve quality of life in the face of hazards, stressors, or shocks by reducing the vulnerabilities across the interacting built, natural, and social systems by increasing the capacity to adapt over time. So when we were when we first started with this, when we got our first disaster recovery money, we started looking at where were the areas that really flooded. And this is a map of where all the different FEMA claims came in. And as you can see, there are definitely pockets where it's much darker than others. And we looked at all of those, and then we overlaid on this map, where are the social vulnerabilities, where's the low income, where's the poverty, where are the people that really can't afford to deal with these issues. And again, we still ended up with about the same 3 pockets, and they pretty much overlapped. So you have this area just south of the city, which we call the Little Codsag Canal area, Little Calumet River, down in the Chicago Heights, Park Forest area, Maywood, Bellwood, up in that area, and then again, way up north, it's Skokie, but it also, there's that big white box. We don't have the claims in there. That's unincorporated Cook County, and there were a ton of them in there. So, we really thought hard about where we should go with this. One of the things that we want to do about building capacity is we wanted to look at the physical capacity of the area. So we were looking, we'll deal with everything to address the flooding issues that are pervious and improve the physical capacity. We want to look particularly at gray and green infrastructure. We want to look at the public right-of-ways. We want to look at vacant land. We want to look at institutional land. Schools, can they be helpful? We want to look at private land, and we want to look at all the redevelopment opportunities. We also want to look at individual capacities, awareness and education about flooding issues. We're going to be working very closely with the Center for Neighborhood Technology. They have not only can they go into homes and help homeowners figure out how to stop the flooding in their basement, but how do you also stop it as a community? Because you put in an overhead sewer, all it does is it pushes the water into your neighbor's yard. So we want to try to figure out as a community, how do we stop this? And how do we adapt to it? And then we also were going to look at government capacities, because as most people know, there's 134 municipalities in Cook County, and a good number of them are stretched beyond where their tax base can handle. So that's a bigger issue for us. So we chose, the pilot area we finally chose was Blue Island, Calumet City, Calumet Park, Dalton, Riverdale, and Robbins. And we chose those in particular because, again, they had significant flooding. They representative of the other vulnerabilities, and MWRD was also looking to do a pilot area and already scoped out an area within our pilot area that they wanted to do a resilience study. So they will be a major partner in this, and they've already engaged Arcadis to help with designing and engineering issues that we see in that area. Also, the Calumet Stormwater Collaborative has also been very active in that area. So we held one joint meeting of all the municipal staff from these 6 towns, which included the public works directors, the economic development directors, and the village managers to look at, where is flooding and what do you want to do about it, and any suggestions they had. And we literally put out a large map. You can kind of see them there, but we put out large maps, satellite maps of their towns, each individual towns, and had them mark them up. You say, tell us where it's flooding, tell us what's going on, where are areas that we need to focus, and so that was really helpful. So what does success look like? We're looking to do broad redevelopment in the pilot area. How do we use the land better? We want to clean up sites. We're on physical capacity, we're looking to make smarter investments. Things like urban agriculture. And what we want to be able to do is not only make investments in gray sewers, but are there other ways to invest that are going to have co-benefits? And we talked a little bit, Jem talked to you all yesterday about the idea of co-benefits. So things like, putting one down at the University of Illinois, they looked at the why don't we plant gardens there that are with natural plants that have natural dyes in them? And then we'll put a dye factory down there and harvest those plants to create dyes for new fabric. I mean, things like that where you're creating jobs and you're creating other ways for people to think about how they live within their own built environment and using what's really there and adjusting to the water. I think that's the big issue. Individuals, obviously, we're going to be working with homeowners to help them think about how do we get water out of their basements. We were in Blue Island and we were talking to the residents there, and they said, oh, we love all the green infrastructure that they put in. We have rain barrels in our house, and they float really well every time it rains. So it was kind of like, okay, so this may not be the right answer. So I think we have to think pretty clearly about what's really going to address the issues. And then obviously government capacity. A lot of these towns are starting way beyond their base. I don't think any of them have ever cleaned out those sewer systems, so where they may have a pipe this big, there's probably at least that much sludge in them. So we gotta figure out how to get those cleaned, and maybe shared services is a way to do that. So, anyway, so we're, obviously there's an emphasis on co-benefits, changing the way the county is doing business. We've now asked our Department of Transportation and our Asset Management Department to look at everything that the county's investing in, as well as what we invest in with our CDBG and home funding. We're going to be looking for ways to create impervious surfaces and more green spaces, that kind of things. So, and then we'll be working a lot on education, having people thinking about how do we do this. Well, one of the major facts we found is that 42% of all the land area in Cook County is now impervious, which means rooftops and parking spaces. So how do we uncover that land so it can absorb water? So, okay.
Excellent. Thank you very much. That's really interesting. Any immediate questions that Jane just done the presentation she gave?
Sure.
So from Aaron from the city of Chicago, tell us about your component of the application and your approach.
Yeah, sure. So I will just add a couple things. We obviously going to Luis's introduction would say that CMAP's role. This has been a really unique process. Working regionally and the way HUD has set this grant up, and just by the nature of who qualified. Again, Luis mentioned that the Cook County, State of Illinois, DuPage County, and City of Chicago, all of us qualified. Very few cities qualified. Only a handful of counties, and most of the states actually did qualify. But having all those bodies and all these layers of government in northeastern Illinois was a really unique situation and a great opportunity. And I got to say, CMAP did a fantastic job of facilitating and making this application possible. So big thank you to CMAP, and especially in the transition that you guys are going through with Randy going to the state and everything. You guys are in a unique period of time. We certainly are too. But indispensable job from CMAP, and a great opportunity for us all to work collaboratively looking forward. So it's been a unique setup to a grant, and to your point about the long-term commitment, whether we get this grant or not, I think we have opened our. It's been eye-opening to figure out what the possibilities are for us to work collaboratively on this topic of resilience, because it is a regional issue. It's not it doesn't end at our governmental borders. So that's just a little background comment I wanted to make. Building on what Jane mentioned, we're leveraging a lot of the same tactics, right? So we have we have very similar environments that we're both focused on. As this chart can show you, you can see Cook County's piece, is down here, you know, in the south suburbs. Our target area is further north on the west side of Chicago. So 6 community areas: Austin, East and West Garfield Park, North and South Lawndale, Humboldt Park, I think that covers all. So anyway, the west side of the city is where we're focused on. To James' point about the multiple layers of vulnerability, you know, we see that in spades on the west side, where you have a high degree of poverty, high degree of elderly people, flooding risk that permeates across the city, frankly, but it has acute concentrations also on the west side. The south side is also south and west side is also a candidate from that standpoint. But we saw the really high intensity of social vulnerability to be the winning factor for us in selecting the West Side demonstration area as our pilot, where we intend to concentrate our CDBG DR activities as part of this grant. So in the outreach that was mentioned, you know, we heard from businesses, we heard from residents, we worked with our sister agency, CTA, understood the infrastructure vulnerabilities we have. So it's really looking at the resilience, opportunities, and vulnerabilities at multiple levels. Really, there's a tremendous unmet need in this area, and I think given particularly the risk around social vulnerability, I mean, one of the things that we heard in our outreach was the lack of social cohesion. So, you know, we talked about some of the flooding issues that people definitely see with rain barrels flooding. You know, what we heard was, you know, I know about the flooding issues that are around my property, but I don't know what's happening down the block. I don't know what's happening around the corner because I don't feel safe walking outside, right? So that's a social cohesion issue, to use the language of our public health department as we're looking at this topic. So in part of our resilience planning, one lens that we're using is to be able to invest in the areas where, again, through that outreach and people drawing on maps, they identify the issues, but they also identify the areas where they feel safe and unsafe, so that we can invest in the co-benefits and create public gathering spaces and safe places, in investing in areas where there's where people need to go, or where people want to go within the community, where they feel safe walking, where the industrial corridors are, where the opportunities for investments, and where we can really use these dollars to seed activity and help revitalize a neighborhood. So that's just, I think tactically we're using a lot of the things, again, that Cook County's going to be doing, and also DuPage County. But I just wanted to give a little bit of flavor for what our Chicago project looks like, and some of the aspects of it on the ground. Thank you.
Questions? Jennifer, do you mind telling us of DuPage County?
So you can kind of see on the map here, DuPage County is immediately west of here, and that's how it ties into this region. And like we discussed, several areas in DuPage County as well as the rest of the region experienced devastating flooding in the April 2013 event. And how we picked our pilot area was we actually mapped the 911 calls and calls to our Office of Emergency Management, and there was just a huge hot spot in the city of Lyle, which is in East Branch DuPage River watershed, and it's one of the watersheds in our county that has been largely unstudied. We have 3 main watersheds: Salt Creek, the West Branch, and the East Branch. Salt Creek, we have major flood control facilities such as the Elmhurst Quarry and other small reservoirs. The West Branch, we've done a lot of projects with river restoration, and we have a couple of other flood control facilities. But the East Branch has so far remained mostly unstudied, even though it has about 25% of the population of DuPage County. So this really presented a perfect opportunity for us to study that watershed and provide more resilient solutions for any future flooding events that occur. And watershed planning is pretty typical of DuPage County stormwater management, but with this opportunity here, we're going to look at it in a different way, and we're going to develop the East Branch watershed and resiliency plan versus just a typical watershed plan that we've done in the past. And based on this plan, we've come up with a few solutions, some major big ideas so far. We're gonna look at things like infrastructure. There's a levee and mile that didn't function as it should during the April 2013 event, leaving the homes nearby inundated. We're also gonna look at things like green infrastructure and streetscapes in downtown areas where they can have a better impact on a local scale. We're also gonna look at restoration projects. Like I mentioned, we've done a few examples of those on the West Branch. We're gonna try to incorporate similar things into the East Branch and restore our rivers. Other things like institutional and behavioral changes that some of the other areas we've talked about already. Basically, we want to make sure that since we're a county, we want to make sure all the municipalities within our county are on board and that any proposed changes within our plan go along with the ordinance they may have. For example, with green infrastructure and native planting, we want to make sure any sort of native plants fulfill the requirements of the ordinance as far as like plant height, just so we're on the same page and all working together towards a solution. Another major part of our plan is a flood forecasting system, and we've developed this in our other watersheds on Salt Creek and the West Branch, mostly for flood control facility operation. But on the East Branch, we want to look at it more on a residential scale, and we're going to tie this into our program on community education and outreach, just so that people are aware. We can maybe give them a day, even a couple hours notice before a flood event occurs would be beneficial, and they know to get their sandbags out or any backup generator systems they have, so that they can be more resilient when the flood event comes, because we can't predict the weather, but we can predict how we react and how we recover after the stresses. And throughout this project, other people have mentioned that we've been working within the community throughout the development, and also we'll continue afterwards. It's a typical process when we develop a watershed plan to involve stakeholders, and stakeholders can be anyone from residents, local businesses, institutions, major landholders, basically anyone involved, anyone who lives in the watershed or anyone who's affected by the watershed is considered a stakeholder. And we have these huge meetings that we coordinate through our outreach specialists, and we take their input after each meeting, after each phase through the plan. We'll get input from our stakeholders, make sure we're all on the same page, if we can take any suggestions, or if there's something that maybe we missed, completely overlooked. That's a good opportunity to get public comment and make sure we're all kind of on board, all incorporating changes that the public thinks are sustainable and can actually be enacted in our watershed plan. So basically one of the main things, our overarching goal here is just that any sort of capital investment needs, or any sort of improvement that we suggest in this plan really needs the capital support in order to develop a sustainable and long-term commitment towards resiliency for the East Branch watershed.
Excellent, great overview. And then the fourth applicant who's not here, but is the state of Illinois, the DNR, so.
Yeah, so I can talk about that really briefly. So the state of Illinois, as you know, they were undergoing a governor transitionship, so they were a little bit of a late coming partner, but they have identified actually 10 pilot areas in their state. I don't recall all of them off the top of my head, but there's definitely some in the Ottawa area. So they went based on 10 regional planning commissions who were interested and able to help participate in this effort. So yeah, there's one by the Ottawa Lake Willamette River area, and then a number of them downstate. Yeah, and so their relationship to our region is a little bit different because they actually qualified for both storms and the same storm we had, as well as some tornado damage. And so they were looking at a broader range of immediate shocks and stressors than we were. But so they have been involved in our partnership regarding the flooding aspect, and of course this is through the IDNR Office of Water Resources, so there was a big policy emphasis from them looking at long-term statewide institutional change, through the Illinois Plumbing Code, through a lot of different, looking at different applications of the Clean Water State Revolving Loan Fund, and things like that that are more within their wheelhouse. But they also have a number of communities that have different kinds of damage, and so the goal of this competition is really to think about those as not just discrete disaster instances, but as a basket of things that might come at you, and how you might, so building resilience to one of them probably builds resilience to many of them. So yeah, Lauren Wobig, who's the acting director, I think, of the Office of Water Resources at IDNR, is the contact person for this if anyone here wants to get in touch with him.
Well, that's a terrific overview, and I think you did a great job in just answering some of the questions about how this builds adaptive capacity, and that's what we were getting at. So when these investments, contribute to adaptive capacity for the long term, and you guys did a great job on that. Any additional comments on that issue? Or?
I have a question. So each municipality or county in the state submitted different applications?
Yes,
But
so.
it was a regional effort.
When this began in November, Pride hosted a summit,
Okay.
and they brought all there's 67 total eligible applicants, 50 states and 17.
48 states. Yeah.
Oh, 48 states, and then 19 jurisdictions, I guess, that are eligible to apply. And they said, they offered 2 seats to everybody, said, come to Washington, and we're gonna tell you about the competition, and they got there, and all they said was, collaborate, 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 collaborate. And then CMAP and their listeners wrote and said, okay, we're collaborating, who's the main applicant? And they wrote back and said, oh no, they all have to